Off the coast of Antarctica, deep underwater, researchers have discovered the British ship called Endurance.
Right here, this is where she sank. This is X marks the spot.
Beneath the most dangerous sea on Earth lies a shipwreck that shouldn't exist, intact, upright, and disturbingly untouched after more than a century. When robotic explorers first turned on their lights, what they saw wasn't just a frozen relic. It was something watching back. Life bloomed where no life should grow. And just beyond the shadows, something moved. Not a current, not a fish. Something else. What if this wreck wasn't lost, but waiting? The hunt in the most dangerous sea on Earth.
Finally, a bit of brighter news, this time from the deep sea, off the coast of Antarctica.
Most people don't realize this, but the Weddell Sea is the closest thing Earth has to an oceanic trap. Even Jacques Cousteau, that famous ocean exploration pioneer, once called it the end of the world's oceans. And for good reason. The water here forms a massive rotating ice vortex, a gyre, big enough to drag entire continents of frozen slabs in slow circles for years.
So this iceberg is absolutely ginormous. It's 5 times the New York City land area and 1,000 feet deep.
This is the same gyre that crushed the Endurance in 1915, and it is the same gyre that destroyed a multi-million-dollar underwater robot during the failed 2019 search. That drone was built with titanium pressure housings, reinforced sensors, and one of the strongest deep ocean navigation systems on Earth. And yet the ice grabbed it and snapped it like a breadstick.
After 30 hours, it suddenly stopped transmitting. We'd lost it, and we had no idea what had happened to it.
That is why, when the South African icebreaker S.A. Agulhas II pushed into the Weddell Sea in February 2022, even hardened polar scientists admitted they were scared. The British Antarctic Survey warned publicly that this search had a low probability of success because the target was less than 150 feet long and the search area was the size of a small city.
All that planning, years of work, all down the tubes, It was literally one of the worst moments of my life.
What made it worse was that the Endurance was thought to be buried under thick layers of sea ice and mud. Many believed it might no longer exist at all. Some theorists even suggested that shifting glaciers may have dragged it miles away from where Shackleton recorded its sinking position. Others believed the ship might be so splintered by ice that it would be unrecognizable, nothing more than a broken scatter of wood and brass lying in black silt.
But that's not just a smooth plane of ice. The ocean currents and waves cause it to buckle and crack and to rear up in great ridges and hummocks.
But the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust had one advantage Shackleton never had: 2 robotic hunters called Sabertooth. These were not ordinary ROVs. Each Sabertooth was a $35 million hybrid AUV equipped with Doppler velocity logs, inertial navigation, synthetic aperture sonar, and lights capable of cutting through water darker than moonless night. They could swim for hours without human input, mapping the bottom of the world with military-grade precision. Yet even with these machines, the search felt hopeless. Day after day, the monitors showed nothing but empty, ghost-gray seafloor. Mud, silt, void. Then, on March 5th, at 4:15 in the afternoon, one Sabertooth returned a sonar image that made the whole control room go silent. A shape, a perfect outline, a ghost rising from the dark.
Oh my
just
gosh.
over there.
Look at that.
And she was just
she is
400 meters
like that,
close.
Lights on, history stares back.
Researchers have discovered the British ship called Endurance, a vessel that launched one of the most remarkable stories of survival and determination.
When the sonar image came back with a shape the same length and curve as Shackleton's ship, the team knew they had one chance to confirm it. The order was simple: retask the Sabertooth, descend again, and activate the LED floodlights. What followed is now the stuff of deep-sea legend.
I've never, ever seen a wreck anything like as beautiful and as inspiring as this one.
As the robot dipped through the freezing black void, descending past 6,000 feet, the live feed flickered with nothing but darkness. Then, after nearly 2 hours, the lights came on, and there it was. The first thing the team saw wasn't the full ship. It was a shadow, a carved wooden curve rising eerily out of the seabed, coated in frost-like sediment but unmistakably shaped by human hands.
This is it. This is the great moment. We found the wreck of the Endurance.
The robot panned slowly. More details emerged: beams that hadn't rotted, a skylight still framed in brass, a tangled ladder hanging where men once climbed to the upper deck. But the moment that broke the room came seconds later, when the robot passed over the stern, and the name Endurance appeared. The paint had faded, but the letters were still there, ghost gold and defiant. It felt, as one team member later said, like the ship was waiting. What shocked the team wasn't just the condition, it was the position. The Endurance was upright, completely intact, and perched like it had gently drifted to the bottom and settled itself. This is impossible.
Her state of preservation is just absolutely brilliant. There are no wood-consuming marine parasites in the Weddell Sea.
Wooden ships wrecked in icy waters usually split or roll. The ice crushes them, flips them, then scatters their bones across miles. But this wreck wasn't scattered, it was parked. Bow facing northeast, almost aligned with Shackleton's last coordinates. 107 years after it vanished, it was exactly where they thought it might be.
The ship appears to be in good condition with the name Endurance still clearly visible.
That never happens. One marine archaeologist in the control room whispered, "It's like she was placed there by hand." Another called it a ghost ship in a museum of pressure. And when the robot's camera passed across the main deck, things only got weirder. The wheel was still mounted, its spokes frozen mid-turn. A boot sat alone outside the crew's quarters, half buried in sediment but eerily whole. Then the camera caught something faint, a bell, still hanging, still shining, like it was ready to ring. And yet this wasn't just a museum piece. Something about the wreck felt wrong. The way it stood, the way it stared back through the camera. Some on board later said they felt watched, not by ghosts, but by something else entirely. The creatures that shouldn't be there. As the saber-tooth's lights hovered longer over the decks of the Endurance, the initial awe began to give way to something else: confusion. What looked at first like frost on the railings turned out to be something very different. The wood and brass weren't just intact, they were alive with growth. Strange, translucent stalks waved in slow motion, bending with the faint current. White tufts bloomed on the handrails. Long, spindly forms clung to the masts, some over a foot tall, pulsing ever so slightly. These were not fish. These were not the usual bottom-dwelling scavengers scientists expected to find on a wooden wreck.
And there's a really nice set of timbers that go all the way across the ship.
They were filter feeders, yes, but of an entirely alien variety, unlike anything seen at these latitudes. Crinoids, feather stars, sea squirts, anemones that glowed faintly under the ROV's lights, life forms that looked more like plants than animals. But the weirdest part? They were thriving. You see, this part of the Weddell Sea is considered a nutrient desert.
It's an area that's going to have, hopefully, a more or less intact ecosystem for much longer than we're going to have in other parts of the Antarctic.
The deep water here is frigid, oxygen-starved, and lacking in food-carrying currents. According to long-standing biological models, these creatures shouldn't have enough to eat, yet here they were. Dozens of species, covering the hull like a vertical reef in a dead zone. Biologists scrambled to explain it. Eventually, a theory emerged. The ship itself was responsible. The Endurance was acting as an artificial structure disrupting the flow of water, creating what researchers now call the ship wake effect. Its 144-foot hull, rising off the seafloor, accelerated the weak Antarctic currents as water passed around it. That faster flow meant more microscopic food particles reached the filter feeders. In effect, the ship had become a fast food buffet in the middle of nowhere, sustaining life in a place no one thought possible. But that's not what made it terrifying. What disturbed the crew was the way the creatures behaved. In footage reviewed frame by frame, some of the anemones on the port railing appeared to turn slightly, as if reacting to the saber-tooth's lights. One pale sea squirt nestled inside a broken lantern seemed to pulse only when the ROV came near. And one operator swore he saw something large slither between two collapsed beams on the main deck, too smooth to be a falling rope, too big to be current drift. He replayed the footage 5 times. Whatever it was, it didn't reappear. Later, the footage was turned over to marine biologists. The official statement? Unidentified benthic anomaly. But off-record, the camera crew called it something else. They called it the Keeper. The thing that lurks just outside the light. If you talk to the crew of the Endurance 22 expedition off the record, many will admit that the most unnerving footage wasn't what the robots filmed directly. It was what they almost filmed. There's a moment, roughly 5 hours after the saber-tooth first illuminated the wreck, when the robot was doing a wide pass along the starboard side. The main lights were focused on the stern, capturing the ship's bell, the wheel, and the rotted edge of the crew's galley. But just outside that cone of brightness, on the edge of black, something moved. One of the drone operators spotted it in real time, a dark, amorphous shape gliding just above the seabed. He marked the time code, swung the camera, and cranked up the gain.
Spot there. Exactly, spot. So we have to search on this area.
But it was already gone, a blur in the darkness. At first, the team dismissed it, maybe a piece of broken rigging shifting in the current, or a shadow caused by sediment kicked up from the seafloor. But that explanation didn't hold. The robot's thrusters were off. There was no current, and other camera angles caught nothing else moving. When the footage was enhanced back on the Agulhas 2, the shape returned, darker than the background, blocking out smaller particulates as it passed. And strangest of all, it seemed to slow down as it neared the light, then veer away. The operator described it as the size of a van, but smooth, almost deliberate. It didn't pulse like a jellyfish. It didn't wave like seaweed. It looked aware. Could it have been a colossal squid? Possibly. The Weddell Sea is home to some of the ocean's strangest megafauna. Colossal squid with eyes the size of dinner plates, known to reach lengths of over 45 feet, do live at this depth. So do Greenland sharks, ancient creatures that can live up to 5 centuries and move with eerie, dreamlike slowness. But this thing wasn't a squid or a shark. It didn't match any known outline. In fact, one zoologist reviewing the clip reportedly said, "Whatever this is, it doesn't blink." Now here's where it gets even weirder. A theory began circulating among the lower ranks of the crew. It started as a joke. What if the wreck is bait? Not a monument, not a tomb, but a lure. Something so perfectly preserved, so hauntingly intact that it draws attention, not just from us, but from the deep itself. The wooden hull, still sharp and whole, now draped in waving tendrils and strange feeders, might be a kind of biological beacon, and something out there might be watching what comes near. The senior scientists shut that theory down immediately. Deep-sea pareidolia, they said. Tricks of the eye caused by stress, fatigue, and darkness. But some weren't so sure. One engineer even refused to pilot the ROV after that night. He said it best. You can map the seafloor, but you can't map what's staring back. The fourth man from the ice. There's a detail from Shackleton's original story that many historians still don't know how to explain.
There are so many places where that could very easily have gone wrong, and it seems absolutely miraculous.
And it's not a shipwreck or a survival feat. It's a presence, a phantom. Shackleton, navigator Frank Worsley, and sailor Tom Crean were the only 3 men to make the impossible 36-hour trek across the uncharted mountains of South Georgia Island in 1916. No sleep, no food, no maps, just desperation.
New Year's Eve arrived with only 170 miles to travel and food in plenty.
But all 3 men later described feeling a fourth person walking beside them. Shackleton never tried to sensationalize it. In fact, he wrote about it reluctantly in his journal, saying only, "It seemed to me often that we were 4, not 3. Worsley, years later, backed it up almost word for word.
Shackleton decides to attempt the almost suicidal journey. The night before he leaves, he writes a note to Frank Wilde.
He described the same quiet but powerful sense of being accompanied, not followed, not watched, but guided. Some have chalked it up to group hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Others have pointed to a psychological phenomenon known as the third man effect, now documented in dozens of extreme survival cases, especially among mountaineers and polar explorers. But here's what's strange. The feeling wasn't just one of comfort. Shackleton admitted in private letters that it felt not entirely human, not malevolent, not protective. Just there. Why does this matter now? Because more than a century later, some of the modern crew who first laid eyes on the Endurance wreck, especially the saber-tooth pilots, reported a nearly identical sensation. Not during storms, not in life-or-death moments, but while observing the ship on screen. One ROV technician wrote anonymously in a post-expedition interview that he felt something pacing them during a 5-hour scan of the lower hull. Another said the silence between sonar sweeps became claustrophobic, as if the water itself was holding its breath. "It's not that you think you're alone," he wrote. "It's that you know you're not." What could it be? Is it simply the psychological toll of navigating a ghost ship in total darkness? A trick of nerves inherited from one of the most legendary polar survival stories in history? Or is there something older at work? Something in the Weddell Sea that doesn't let go of things easily? Something that watched Endurance go down in 1915? And is still there now? To this day, the British Antarctic Survey does not officially acknowledge any anomalous psychological events during Endurance 22. But in internal logs, there's a recurring notation used by at least 4 different saber-tooth operators. It appears next to sonar anomalies, camera glitches, and unexplained pressure dips. 2 words, always the same: fourth man. When a wreck becomes something more. Most shipwrecks decay. They break, scatter, get buried, or are eaten away by time. But not the Endurance. Over 100 years after it sank, it's not just preserved, it's changing, becoming something it never was when it floated. That's the unsettling truth that has started to ripple through deep-sea biology and marine archaeology circles since the 2022 discovery. Because the wreck isn't static, it's active, dynamic, and growing. Let's start with the ecosystem. In the year since the initial footage went public, several deep-sea researchers, particularly from the British Antarctic Survey and international benthic programs, have observed something odd in follow-up sonar. The biomass clinging to the hull has increased significantly. Not just the number of filter feeders, but the variety. Entire new colonies of feathery organisms, long-fronded sponges, and translucent polychaetes have sprouted like wild growth along the ship's port side. And unlike normal benthic settlement patterns, which form slowly and evenly, the Endurance shows asymmetrical colonization. Life clusters densely around the stern and midsection but avoids the bow. No one knows why. There's also a more controversial theory emerging among a few whispering scientists. Biotic magnetism. The idea is that the ship itself is starting to alter its environment biologically, not just mechanically. Its presence may be affecting sediment distribution, current flow, and even drawing certain species from surrounding miles of seafloor toward it. In other words, Endurance might be becoming an attractor, like a black hole, but biological. Some even compare it to hydrothermal vents, places where life thrives in deep ocean darkness against all odds. But those are fed by Earth's inner heat. The Endurance has no heat, no minerals, just history. More startling, there's growing evidence that the wooden planks are harder now than they should be. Samples from micro-ROV drills show that the oak and fir used to build her have become so compressed by time, pressure, and cold that they're nearly impervious to penetration. One engineer described the core sample as closer to bone than timber. That same material, in the lab, began to leach a faint, oily residue, one not matching any of the original ship construction records. It's unclear whether this is breakdown or mutation. Is the Endurance decaying or evolving? That's the terrifying question. It isn't just a perfectly preserved ship frozen in time. It's changing while we're watching it, reclaiming space, growing life, repelling intrusions, drawing the living, and maybe something else closer. Some now call it the cathedral at the bottom of the world. Tell us what you believe, and don't forget to subscribe for more.